Good afternoon and welcome to Borsa Kuwait. I'm Habari Al-Khashti, CSR Manager at Borsa Kuwait. Thank you for joining us for this important panel, part of our Borsa Kuwait Women Empowerment Initiative, organized in collaboration with CFA Society Kuwait and CFA Institute. Today we celebrate women leadership at the heart of capital market, recognizing and amplifying the voices of those shaping investment strategy, strengthening governance frameworks, and advancing sustainable market growth through informed, disciplined dialogue. As we approach International Women's Day 2026, under the global theme, Rights, Justice, Dignity for all women and girls, this conversation takes on even greater significance. It reminds us that inclusive leadership goes beyond representation. It's about impact, it's about insights, and all above. It's about creating a system of equity through informed decision-making. And now, to open this important conversation, we are honored to hear from someone who embodies the value we celebrate today. Please join me in welcoming Borsa Kuwait board member, Mrs. Dalal Bahbahani, to the stage.
Good afternoon. It's a true pleasure to welcome you in Borsa Kuwait for today's important discussion, hosted in collaboration with the CFA Institute and CFA Society Kuwait and held in commemoration of International Women's Day, observed this year under the powerful theme, Rights, Justice, Action for all women. Let's pause at the last word, action. Rights discussed but not exercised, justice promised but not delivered, inclusion celebrated but not funded. That's not progress, that's branding. Real progress shows up in our daily decisions, in the boardrooms, in the portfolios, in risk models, and where the capital flows, and sometimes even where it doesn't flow. This is why today's conversation matters. We're here to talk about how investment decisions are actually made, how performance and risk are truly measured in a world that is anything but simple, and how sustainable actions and sustainability concepts are moving from the margins of strategy to the very center of long-term investment strategy and capital allocation. This can only be achieved when we acknowledge that gender diversity is not a social objective, it's a business and operating imperative. Diverse leadership delivers stronger outcomes, and the real question is no longer whether organizations can afford to prioritize diversity, but whether they can afford not to. Today's discussion goes to the heart of capital allocation and investment decision-making across listed companies, institution portfolios, and sovereign wealth funds. We'll examine performance measurements, risk assessment, and the growing integration of sustainability and ESG considerations in the long-term strategies that we build. These are not theoretical concepts. These are the daily responsibilities of exceptional panelists joining us today, women who operate at the highest level of financial decision-making, where judgment carries weight, outcomes matters, and accountability is real. We're lucky to have with us three leaders who don't just observe markets, they shape them with substantive leadership. Ms. Reem Al-Hajri, General Manager of Investment Relations, M&A at STC, أهلا وسهلا. And Ms. Anwar Al-Ajil, Senior Vice President at Gulf Investment Corporation. It's so nice to have you here. And guiding this conversation is Ms. Sarah Maynard. Thank you for joining us. Global Head of External Inclusion and Diversity Strategies and Programs at the CFA Institute. Someone who understands that inclusion is not a side conversation in finance. It's a performance issue, a governance issue, and ultimately a market issue. I urge you throughout the discussion to connect the dots. Connect the dots between capital allocation and consequences, between risk and personal responsibilities, between growth and sound governance. And I have a really good view from here of how the table is designed and who should be sitting at the table. Your presence here is a signal of what the future of our market should look like. What we're talking about today is not just where markets are, but where we choose to take them. We'll close the sessions today with a bell ringing ceremony, a tradition that signals movement, momentum, and intention. Finally, I'd just like to take a few seconds to address the emergent leaders and young professionals in this room. I'd like to say, invest deliberately in your professional growth, seek mentors, and then become one when the time comes. Build strong networks grounded in trust and shared purpose. That's what we're really good at. Take your seat at the table, and when you do, make space for others. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to a meaningful discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dalal, for your inspiring speech. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. It is a pleasure to be back at Borsa Kuwait and to mark another moment in what has been a long and meaningful partnership between CFA Society Kuwait and Borsa Kuwait. Our collaboration with Borsa did not start today. It has grown over the years through shared initiatives, dialogue, and a common commitment to strengthening Kuwait's capital markets. Today's event also reflects an important theme for our industry, supporting the participation and progression of women in investments and financial markets. This is not only about representation, it is about ensuring that diverse perspectives are part of how decisions are made and how our markets continue to develop. We truly value our partnership with Borsa Kuwait and look forward to continuing this collaboration through more joint initiatives and conversations that bring market together. I would also like to sincerely thank our panelists for their participation today and extend a special thank you to Sarah Maynard from CFA Institute for joining us in Kuwait and sharing her global perspective. Thank you once again, Borsa Kuwait, for hosting us, and thank you everyone for being here.
And now, to open this important conversation, we are honored to hear from our panelists, Ms. Reem Al-Hajri and Anwar Al-Ajil, moderator Sarah Maynard, and unfortunately, due to the emergency work commitment, Mrs. Basma Al-Farisi could not make it to the panel and sent her apologies.
Well, thank you so much. I'm both honoured and delighted to be here. It's my first time in Kuwait, so this is a real pleasure, and I will say a learning journey for me, as much as I hope to be able to also share the work that we've done across multiple markets, because my role is global. When we think about inclusion, both globally and locally, and connecting those two dots is a really critical part of the work that we do. So just before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to share with you a few... Okay, thank you. So that just gives us a sense of the way the conversation is going to flow. So I wanted to be able to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about and before we move into the panel discussion. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So when we come together today, we're all very conscious of the amount of changing news, the new expression called meta-interruptions, which I can hardly even say, but the scale of change in the world at the moment is really quite breathtaking. Whether we think about the introduction of AI, we think about the way in which economic factors are changing, geopolitics are adjusting. All of that's a huge amount of information for us all to process, for organizations to factor into their planning, and indeed for investment markets to price to value and to price forward. So when we think about the work that we're doing, I wanted to put it in the context of all this change, a higher level of uncertainty than perhaps we've known for decades, and also the opportunities in that environment. And one of the interesting aspects of my work, when I think about what CFA Institute does, we have a mission, and the sort of, to my mind, really important words at the end of that mission, aside from the importance of ethics and professionalism and education, are also we work for the ultimate benefit of society. And so when we think about the investment industry, then thinking about how do we do this work for the ultimate benefit of society is really critical. So when we think about all these different factors, we also want to think about the things that are coming down the pipe which give us opportunities for positive change, for greater inclusion for all, actually, in terms of whether they have investment opportunities as individual savers, or indeed whether they have career opportunities in a highly professionalized industry. And whether we think, too, about the education opportunities, because one of the things we know is the difference education can make in terms of opportunities and indeed professionalism, and important factors like ethics. So again, really wanting to showcase the opportunity, and particularly to be aware of what's happening in this region, and thinking about the really important markers that have been put out, the ambitious markers in terms of the direction of travel regionally and specifically locally in Kuwait. I think those are important things to celebrate and to recognise, and I'll also come on to some numbers that will give you a sense of how the data may be shifting in terms of gender inclusion. And of course, what that can mean when we empower women in terms of economic opportunities. Another factor, when you put all these different pieces together, is the resilience, which we think that individuals need, organizations need, systems need. And how do we build that in? Another way of thinking about this is that inclusion gives you a real opportunity to build connections between teams, between organizations, and indeed a closer understanding of the end investor, the end client, and what are the products designed that will best suit their needs going forward. So I've made this big emphasis around resilience, and I wanted to call out the position of the Kuwaiti pension scheme in terms of the global pension index that CFA Institute produces with Mercer each year. I think that's an interesting angle, and that ranking is something that usually has a lot of interest for nations, for governments, and of course for the underlying saver. Could we move to the next slide, please? So when we think about the financial services industry, and we think about the way in which the industry is evolving in response both to all these external factors, but of course also the factors that are driving change within the investment industry. Of course, what a big headline has been is the introduction of AI. I'm sure all of you are getting to grips or have already got well under that journey in terms of what does tech change mean? Are organizations going to use this to move some of the admin or more tedious, repetitive work into an AI system, and are they then going to focus on what humans can do? Essentially, how do we continue to nurture client relationships? How do we have strong interpersonal relationships within teams? And what's the opportunity that inclusion can really help us to harness, such that instead of seeing this as a somewhat zero-sum world in which AI takes a lot of roles but doesn't necessarily offer anything in anything else, that actually organizations can think about, here's an opportunity for all of us, as I say, to build relationships, which are what ultimately drives meaningful change, does indeed speak to that important resilience, and can also help us all to grow creatively. I'll get there in the end. So that's another way of thinking too about the opportunities for innovation. That innovation is a very important way in which you drive growth, economic growth, growth in financial markets, and really start to think about that business of working for the ultimate benefit of society. So I see this time as a time of opportunity, particularly when it's shaped with real sort of thoughtfulness, knowledge, intentionality. And I love some of the opening remarks. I think there's some great learnings for us there, and we'll explore it a bit more in the panel in a moment. So one of the things we wanted to think about is the opportunity. I particularly think we wanted to highlight that this is a region that is expanding and growing. We can actually see that in the numbers of folks who are coming into the investment industry across the region. Now, that's not true in all markets, and so that is a particular point to note. We're looking at the numbers of firms globally that want to invest in the region. Again, a lot of opportunity there, opportunity for employment, for economic empowerment, for growth and development. And CFA Institute is, of course, very pleased to be part of that growth and development. We're looking really to how we can help individuals progress in their careers through education. Education may be small bite size, it may be something heavy duty like the CFA program, There are multiple different ways of approaching that, but what we do know is that those folks who can take the time to invest in themselves are themselves then more likely to succeed, be invested in by their employers, and then be able to pay that forward in terms of thinking about the ultimate client. And of course, that wonderful point about making space for others at the table. The more credential, the more credibility you bring, the more you can actually be that conduit to change. Next slide, please. And when we think about change, I really did want to highlight what we can see here in terms of the change in the numbers, because while we are all very aware of gender perhaps levels not being maybe where we think they could potentially be, we also need to lean into the positive lessons that we can see. And one thing I would particularly highlight is the rate of growth in this region, including in Kuwait, has been phenomenal and actually faster than we're seeing in a lot of other markets. So I think this is a point to celebrate, to also recognise that you all are part of that change and development. And indeed, that opportunity sits with you as much as it does with wider society. And I think that's an important point when you think, as I say, women's empowerment does mean for each of you. And when you think about your careers through that lens, I hope that will help to lift you up and to move you through those times when the challenges feel immense and heavy. So lean into the positives. So as I say, you can see both in terms of the membership, but also that line to the future, which is we use our CFA program candidate data as a way to see who's coming into the industry. And the shape in terms of gender diversity is really evolving fast. Now, that means for organizations, there is an opportunity. There is talent out there, educated, clearly committed, signing up to ethics and professionalism, all of those things that the industry really needs. So talent, the availability of talent is something that we want to share with employers in Kuwait and more widely to understand that the opportunity sits with them. And therefore, we think that there is something that can really happen in terms of the employee value proposition that is shaped, and indeed that this is expressed as an opportunity for all. Because one thing that my conversations globally has taught me is that if we just talk about the empowerment of one group, we may actually not achieve the result we want to, that we need to say this is empowering for all. That actually when women are empowered, everybody benefits, their families benefit. We can see very clearly that when women get educated, and we did a study in 2016, which I hope we will be repeating this year, when we learnt that essentially women with the CFA actually have children who are more educated and go on to be more successful. So you are not just doing something for yourself, you are doing something for your family and for future generations. Next slide, please. And then when we think about human capital, so we're in a setting where, of course, we think about financial capital, and it's very important we do, but we also need to think about human capital. So we need to think about what's the connective tissue and how we define human capital. And I'm taking quite a broad lens here and thinking about all the different ways in which we understand how people operate in the workplace. And so what I really wanted to share with you is a connective thread that I think can be seen as really connecting a tapestry, I would say, of different factors, all of which need to come into play when we think and when organizations think about what do they mean by human capital. And the investment industry is very good at great data for finance, a lot of technical detail. We do not always look so carefully at human capital. And that's something where we think that this work can be enormously differentiating for the firms of the future and indeed for the countries of the future, for the nations, for the economic empowerment of wider society. So that really is my sort of theme, if you like, for today that I hope you can take away. And this takes us into the panel, and that is where I'm going to be super interested to hear from our esteemed panelists. So thank you very much for joining me, and let's move to that part of the discussion. Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Quick wave. Yes, thank you so much for waving. Appreciate that. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is ask each of you to introduce yourselves and to tell us those things that maybe we don't always put in our bios, but you think perhaps would be good to share with the audience. If I can Excuse me. So, Reem, if I can ask you to start, and please share with the audience some of your learning points that we perhaps don't see in your bio, and then we can move on after that. Thank you.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here today. It feels like being in a girls' club today. So, and of course, I would like to start by thanking Borsa Kuwait for this great opportunity, CFA Institute and CFA Society. My name is Reem Al-Hajri. I've started my career 26 years ago, training and working at Kuwait Investment Authority. I then moved to Camco Invest, where that was the bulk of my experience, moving from an investment research department to the asset management. So that gaining experience in the whole spectrum of equity, whether buy side or sell side. And then as the market evolved to be among the emerging markets, there was the growing need for more of a strategic financial communication role in operational companies. So my first role in that, heading the IR function in Mabani, which is a real estate company listed in Kuwait. And currently I'm the GM of Investor Relations and Mergers and Acquisition at Kuwait Telecommunication Company. In parallel, I'm also a board member at Kuwait Transparency Society, which is a chapter of Transparency International. So again, looking forward for today's discussion.
Well, thank you so much, and wonderful to hear about all aspects of your career, and I hope we'll get into it further. Anwar, can I pass the baton to you to do the same? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and it's my pleasure to be today here with you as part of this amazing event and sharing thoughts and ideas with you. My name is Anwar Al-Ajil. I have an engineering background with experience almost 19 years in private equity, direct investments. Mainly my experience in telecom and technology, financial services, and recently power and water and utilities project across the GCC region.
Well, thank you so much. It's very interesting to hear how many engineers we have in investment. I think there's something about processes and technicality that really drives success in this industry. And when we think about success and we think about driving performance, I wonder if each of you could really sort of speak to how you think leaders can best inspire their teams to bring new creative ideas to enhance return on investment, and the role that with this theme of women's empowerment in mind, perhaps how leaders can really help drive performance. Would you like to start?
Sure. Of course, this is a very important aspect, and I think that true leaders don't think of only return on investment purely on a performance management basis. I think what true leaders would do is to cultivate, a culture of thinkers, not doers, and a culture of diverse thinking, psychological safety. And accountability is foundational, and probably one of the most effective ways is to actually and deliberately, engage those who have been known historically for being underrepresented, and especially women. So when women are, empowered to challenge the conventional thinking, to offer their ideas, we're not only tapping into, just ticking a diversity matrix there, you're actually unlocking a capital, an intellectual capital. So especially in STEM, I mean, you probably mentioned it earlier, ladies who work in the science, technology, engineering, and management, and this is globally, they're underrepresented. They're like only 20 to 30% of the workforce. And you want to focus on these where you cannot afford to leave an untapped value there with these kind of professions.
That's an untapped value. That's such an important point. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Anwar, what's your take on this question?
Yes. So for me, leaders need to create a culture that letting people speaking without fear. Mm-hmm. So when you discuss, when you are in a committee or a weekly meeting, you give them the opportunity. Everyone in the room have to discuss their point of view. There is no fear, there is no one right or wrong. You have to listen to everyone, especially the woman. Because, you know, I believe strongly that women, they have different point of view. They are very, you know, they ask many questions. They don't like, you know, to take very high risk. So they are cautious in their decision. And there is a few blind spots in their thinking. So I believe as a leader, you have to inspire your team by being, you know, give them the freedom to speak what is in their head. There is no limitation. So I believe this is the most important point.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and very interesting. But maybe we'll come back to the biases that are indeed afflict us all. When we think about that sort of multiple perspective, multiple data points, and indeed women thinking differently from men, and indeed within groups of men and within groups of women, there will be many, many differences. So when we think about how leaders need to be able to bring together these multiple perspectives, and maybe indeed, of course, multiple data points into a strategy which has to be cohesive. How do you think we can learn to harness that difference and indeed bring different team members together? I mean, I think, Reem, you mentioned psychological safety. I think that's an important one. Would you like to expand a bit further on how to harness diverse teams?
Sure. I think, of course, having the most effective cross-functional teams are the ones that come from different backgrounds, and of course, women, men, and different hierarchy in the organization. And I think what really fuels that is the culture, not the process of the organization, where leaders in these organizations would act subconsciously towards that direction, where they can create this safe environment for everyone to speak up their minds, regardless of, you know, being a man or a woman or, you know, a junior professional or a senior. That brings a lot of, a lot of great results. And this is not just a theory. I mean, I'm sure we've all been through that one way or another when we've seen the results of that. And one probably, this was evident in one of the projects that I worked with when I was in Mabani. Mabani happens to have, you know, the biggest footprint in terms of real estate. And shortly after COVID, we received, you know, some comments from active shareholders where they were asking us about, you know, the rating, MSCI rating. It was CCC, and they were just asking why is it too low. And to me, as the head of IR, of course, I was trying to understand more. The ESG wasn't, you know, in the main consciousness of corporates during that time. Everyone was busy just to get their business back on the run, you know, after COVID. So what I did is that I was trying to reach out to different departments, trying to get answers, you know, trying to understand the framework. And honestly, not everyone was interested, you know, to answer. They have more important things to get back to me on. So what I did is that I walked up to the deputy CEO back then, who's actually the head of the function, and I told him, listen, I mean, the best way to tackle this is to have an ESG committee, a cross-functional, team of people who are in the battlefield. We're not talking only seniors. We're talking everyone, subject matter experts. And that kind of approach helped a lot to be on the same table, and everybody spoke their minds. And I mean, surprisingly, in less than 2 years, the rating went up from CCC to BB. And they had the first woman sitting on their board. And just the end of last year, they signed the first green finance agreement with MBK. So I've seen it firsthand. What is it like to have this inclusive sort of, culture, started by a woman, yes, and a cross-functional team, yes, and a leadership that actually believed in it. Yeah.
I think that would make a wonderful case study that companies globally could learn from. So thank you so much. Anwar, what's your sort of interpretation, or how would you approach, or how do you think organizations should approach, or even if you have a similar example you'd like to speak to, do please share it with our audience.
First of all, I don't try to blend opinions. I structure the debate. Mm-hmm. So how I do that? By assigning roles. Mm-hmm. Someone discuss the investment idea. someone discussed the downside of it, the risk, the alternative. So when you assign roles, you engage everyone in the room to speak their thing, and then you create a challenge, and the team, all of them, they will, at the end, they will reach as the same, let's say, outcome. So at the end, the structure turns into performance, and I believe strongly to do that.
I think I can hear your engineering background.
Exactly. Everything should be structured well.
Structure is important because you can't make change without it. So that's great, super helpful. When we think about important priorities that have been identified for the GCC region, focusing on fostering economic growth, economic diversification, and capital market development across the region, what sort of aspects of economic action for women do you think are worth, that we should highlight perhaps in terms of that strategy, and what kind of impact do you think that can have?
Well, these are all important aspects, whether we're talking about capital development, economic growth, and but these are not fully optimized unless you fully optimize the women's empowerment, of course. So one of the most effective, let's say, economic actions GCC governments would do is to let them participate more in the high value, let's say, sectors such as the finance, investment, and technology. So this is very important, and it has to be a policy driven. So especially that women do bring in more, let's say, risk adjusted decisions to the table, which is very crucial in this volatile environment.
Absolutely, yes. And Anwar?
As you know, GIC is owned by the 6 government entities. So, as a GIC, you can see the woman in each division and each department. In the direct investment, in the global market, in the finance, every division, there is a woman representative there. So they believe strongly in diversity. They believe on the added value of the woman, and not only they don't look at the woman only as a contributor. The woman they give the woman the decision-making role. So you can see many, like I represent GIC in many board member taking decisions. So they believe strongly of the role of the woman and how the woman can really add value to the institution.
That's important. Thank you so much. And then when we think about the way in which developing an investment strategy, analysing and evaluating investment proposals, really very key to advancing inclusive capital markets. And before I came, I was looking at Borsa Kuwait's work with entrepreneurs and that young entrepreneur program, which I thought looked amazing, and really just wanting to sort of think about how can education help, and how do we need to what do we need to sort of do in terms of access to education to really make the difference in terms of women's empowerment?
Of course, education is foundational, but honestly, in my opinion, what's more important is awareness, advocacy, and mentorship. For instance, in my early days in the job, that was before the financial crisis, there was the void of senior financial professionals, someone whom one could relate to. So I remember that was probably a funny story where men used to trade, easier and faster because they have easier access to information, where we just count on fundamental. But what happened is that when 2008 financial crisis hit, we all stood out equally in defending, or protecting our wealth, clients' wealth, and of course our employers. So I think advocacy is really key, and it has to be a policy-led kind of advocacy. Whether women want to pursue a job in the investment field or they want to invest themselves. I mean, women do have access to capital. They pile a lot of wealth, and so I think we should have more awareness session because of the fact that even women in nature are less risk takers, and probably it's not about their ability; it's just about their exposure, and they need the right guidance to do it. In addition to that, of course, the women's access, we need to have her prepared, very well prepared and educated to be in the boardrooms. So it's time for an action now. It's not just a symbolic presence. I'm sure she has a lot to offer in the boardroom, and we have an example here. So definitely education, yes, it's crucial, but apart from that, and of course the women's herself, she needs to stand up for herself. She needs to raise her hand whenever she finds an opportunity to speak up her mind. So a whole set of reasons, of course, on top of it, education, definitely.
Thank you. And you really speak to the complexity of the situation, because there's multiple different strands there that we all need to be aware of. And one thing that we did notice in looking at the CFA Institute data, amongst just if you look at the numbers of women in Kuwait who have their CFA and are working as portfolio managers, for example, that's about 12% of the member population locally. But then if we think about those who have got to the C-suite level, that's more like 3%. So you could see that there is potential for the women of the future leaders, maybe already in the industry, that actually with more support, encouragement, and indeed putting themselves forward for those opportunities, that future growth can come from. So just a thought to share with you all. And Anwar, perhaps let's hear from you in terms of that advancing inclusive capital markets and how you think about that.
First of all, I come from a family that believes strongly in education. It's very, crucial. My mom started as a kindergarten teacher until she reached a GM in Ministry of Education in Kuwait before she retired. So for us at home, education is extremely important. Education is the foundation, is the engine. So when you have a strong base, you can grow fast. Without this base, you cannot reach nowhere. So when you have this knowledge and you combine it with an experience, you get the best outcome. And you can implement that in the capital market. And I can see recently, let's say for the last 5 to 7 years, the woman is in everywhere in the capital market, in a financial institution, in the banking sector. It's everywhere you found a woman representative in this institution. So for me, the combination of a strong education background with the experience in the finance is the best outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Do we have time for some questions from our audience? And if so, do we have any questions? Yeah, please.
Honestly, that's not my specialty area, because after I left Mabani, I heard it in the news. Of course, I take pride that I was part of the journey. From my basic knowledge of it, is these are finances that are highly tied to, let's say, strategic, sustainable projects. So it was to finance one of the lead projects. I think it's called, you can find it in the news, Souk Sabah. So it was built based on lead, let's say, or sustainable initiatives or sustainable compatibility. That's probably the only thing I know. But I know for sure that, it's a growing thing because of the fact that real estate companies, they do have a bigger footprint and they have the biggest impact on the environment.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I'm the technical consultant for Gulf Bank Corporate Banking, and we're working on green financing. I wanted to add to that question. Mabani were the leaders in this. So basically, this project is a lead project, and they have the highest level of lead, which is gold. And it's basically to look into the materials used as lead materials, sustainable construction tools, even all the rules and regulations for construction are different to normal construction practice in Kuwait. So honestly, Mabani we're leaders in this initiative, and we're hoping to do more green lending and financing in Kuwait.
Thank you so much. That's really very helpful, very interesting. Any other questions from our audience?
Hello, my name is Shema bin Hussein. I want to ask you, Reem, you said in 2008 you were like equally treated to defend your clients and everything. At that time, if not mistaken, lots of women and young girls working in asset management. After that date, if you check now in most of the investment companies, in that department, specifically asset management, we don't find lots of females. We see a lot of males, and the females, they don't, let's say, scale in that position. Why? I believe we need more, but why they're not joining there anymore?
Honestly, again, it's a cultural thing, and it's a trust thing. So, and I've seen it firsthand. I think they lean more towards having the men leading purely because their risk appetite. They're willing to take risks. Women are more systematic, and they're more driven by governance, policies, and processes. Which something we need it, but in quick decisions sometimes you need just to act fast. I think that's one of the main reasons, honestly. Again, I think even women themselves probably they find it a bit, scary to join that kind of a job. For me, I just decided to leave because, for once I felt like, khalas, I cannot take it. It's very stressful job. So for women, especially mothers, they find it a bit stressful. If there wasn't the right culture to support that, I think, women probably won't be able to continue in this. Apart from that, of course, we hope things do change, with of course, the regulations that we're seeing now, more and more from, the CMA and, of course, Borsa. So things are more, organized now, and I think it makes it, they leveled the playing field for women to join that, that field. For me, I had enough of it. So I'm happy to do what I'm doing currently with investor relations and, of course, investment banking, M&A. Yeah.
There's a question from over there.
Yes, I would. Could I just, hear from you, and then I will contribute something verbally.
A few years back, maybe more than 10, I was at the Institute, and we had a workshop, and we were working on this, and they were saying, why are there, actually there was an initiative, which was Women in Finance at the time. We had this whole initiative, and the question was why women don't do finance, and is it because it's a tough job? And then the answer was no, because we do STEM. So you have women in engineering and in medicine, and these are tough jobs. Mm-hmm. And I think the conclusion at the time was women don't like the unknown. Women tend to not tolerate not knowing. Women prefer to work hard. They know the end game. And with finance, we don't. So I'm a portfolio manager. I've been doing asset management for over 25 years. I'm an executive director at NBK Wealth. And we have recently started to see the youth come. So I was, up to 5 years ago, the team was me and 15 gentlemen. And now we have 6 women on the team. Women are starting to change. The younger generation has adapted to risk a lot more. And you see this with the younger ones. Now, the younger ladies are more willing to take risk because I think we're not as worried about the family. Our families are set. You really do have partnerships in families now with the younger generations. Men are more open, helping around in the house, and women are now more willing to take risks. It's never been about the hard work. I think women are always willing to work hard. It's just they don't like the fear of the unknown for women. Mm-hmm. And we always comment about, this is not happening. We don't have support of society. But sometimes it's really just the way we're built. And equal is not the same. We can be equal but different. And that's fine. We can go to C-suite in jobs that we're comfortable with and jobs that will always have men in C-suite. That's fine. For me, my belief is equal is not the same. And we need to realize this and accept it.
There are a couple of points I'd like to pull out from that, all of which these points are super useful. One of the things, we did a survey immediately following and actually in the midst of the pandemic, and we looked at changes in behaviour. So what was happening, and we surveyed CFA members globally to see what changes were happening as a result of everyone having to work from home. And one of the things we saw was immediately, and this was globally in every market we surveyed, that typically women were taking the brunt of care, whether it was care of their own children or indeed often maybe supervising the care of their parents-in-law, for example. So there was an unequal distribution of the burden, and clearly, cultural expectations do play a part in that. And that was something that happened and therefore depressed women's involvement in the industry for a period of time. And so there was an adjustment. I think the other angle that we've also seen from our very much sort of global data, but then homing in on each market, is that I think the point about uncertainty is actually a human-wide issue. Humans don't like uncertainty because actually uncertainty can often translate into a fear of loss, that there is something happening that is going to be different in your lives, and therefore it creates say, a period of when you perhaps feel less confident about the future. So humans generally don't seem to react well to that. But then culturally, women are, of course, often, the sort of heart of the home, and they have a lot riding on their and their position and their work. And so therefore, perhaps the burden can feel heavy. But I think what's really important is actually leaning into all the things that women can do and the systems that can help them achieve. So certainly the education point and certainly the support within organisations is really important. And then it's great to see that when work is happening behind the scenes and you have a woman role model, then other women will join the team and feel like this is something that they can do. But this is particularly, as I highlighted, a point of change. So this is perhaps an opportunity for women across the industry to see how do they contribute to change, to acknowledge that change does bring all kinds of uncertainty and some negative emotions, but to try and lean into the opportunity that is there. And also the other thing I would say, speaking as somebody who absolutely understands the decision sometimes to stand back, which I did when my children were very young, but then I found a way to reinvent my career later on. So I think that's another way of looking at it, that sometimes there are cycles in your own life that mean you do different things at different times, and that can happen. But yeah. So would we perhaps close this part of the discussion maybe with the advice that each of you would give to your younger selves? So if you were sort of starting out now, what do you think, what advice would you give yourself at the beginning?
Well, I think curiosity. I was less curious. I was probably going with the norm and trying to wait for instructions. Definitely someone has to be curious, to read more, to ask more questions. So yeah, definitely curiosity, because I'm now curious more than ever. I wish I've done it, earlier in the job, of course.
Honestly, I'm proud of myself where I reach. I faced a lot of challenges. There is some point that I want really to give up, but I didn't, and I'm happy, because if I will not reach where I am now, if at that point that I feel that I'm breaking out and I cannot. So I push myself to the maximum. I become strong by myself to reach this point. So maybe the only thing that I'm very, cautious, and I don't take high risk. So sometimes in life, some opportunity, you need to have the courage to take this risk. I'm always, between the base case and to not take a high risk. So maybe this, I would teach myself earlier in my life to be more courage to take high risk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you both for sharing. Thank you to our audience for your questions, for your comments. I have to say, I always think it's so interesting when we have lots of different views within the group, and it's great to really hear all the different points of view that I've heard from the questions. And of course, I look forward to continuing the conversation over our networking afterwards. Thank you so much.